All right, let's dive into some pretty intense lyrics today.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to be exploring the words of Totem Spectre,
Okay.
who you might know better now as Alice Deeper,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you followed their music back in the mid to late 90s.
Right. Yeah.
And we're going to try to break down the psychology behind these lyrics,
Okay.
what they revealed about the artist and how they might impact listeners like you who are interested in the connection between, music and the mind.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to see how an artist's inner world, is reflected in their work.
Mm.
Especially someone like Totem Spectre, whose music, had this reputation for being pretty dark and industrial.
Right. And we've got copy of all first run legacy lyrics cleaned up to work from.
Okay.
And right away you see these themes of fear and darkness
Yeah,
jump out at you.
for sure.
Songs like Why Fear and Visions of Fear. They don't shy away from exploring those darker corners of human experience.
Yeah, it's more than just surface level darkness, though, right? Yeah.
These lyrics seem to point to a deeper struggle with existential dread.
Hmm.
Almost like Camus or Sartre set to music.
Wow.
Like, take Driven by Force, for example.
Okay.
It's less about physical force and more about feeling trapped by forces beyond your control.
Right.
Whether that's societal or even cosmic,
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Like the artist is wrestling with these big philosophical questions about free will and meaninglessness.
Yeah.
And that feeling of being trapped seems to tie into another recurring theme we see, escape.
Yeah.
We see it in songs about trains, highways, forests.
Right.
All these things symbolizing a desire to break free.
And even the references to drugs and altered states of consciousness,
Yeah.
psychosis is a good example,
Right.
suggest a search for escape, or maybe even transcendence from this perceived existential trap.
But would you say that that's like an unhealthy escape? Or could there be
Yeah.
some psychological benefit to exploring those themes?
I mean-
even if they're dark? It's complex.
Yeah.
For the artist, maybe it's cathartic,
Right.
a way to confront those fears and anxieties.
Mm-hmm.
For the listener, it really depends.
Yeah.
Someone who relates to those feelings of existential angst
Right.
might find it validating,
Okay.
even empowering.
Yeah.
Others might find it disturbing or triggering.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like holding up a mirror to the darker parts of ourselves, which can be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but also potentially lead to some self-awareness and growth.
Exactly. And while escape is a major theme, it's important to remember that these lyrics aren't simply about running away.
Yeah.
There's a tension between this urge to escape and a simultaneous longing for connection.
Oh, absolutely. Songs like Salvation Song and Angel immediately come to mind.
For sure.
There's this yearning for something more,
Yeah.
a hope for finding meaning and connection, even amidst all the darkness.
And then there's how love is portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
It's not romanticized at all. You see lyrics like love is shit and thrown away my face,
Yeah.
which hint at a deep cynicism or disillusionment
Right.
with those like traditional notions of love and relationships.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical love song material.
No, not at all.
It makes me wonder if those lyrics are like a reflection of personal experience
Mm-hmm.
or a commentary on society's view of love,
Right.
or maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, perhaps it's a rejection of
Huh.
like this societal pressure to conform to certain relationship ideals.
Okay.
And this could tie back into that theme of individuality and authenticity that we see,
Yeah.
like in Swamp Song,
Mm-hmm.
where embracing the unconventional,
Right.
even the ugly or the dark, is presented as a form of freedom.
There's definitely a sense that the artist isn't interested in fitting into these predefined boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that rejection of norms might give us a glimpse into Totem Spectre's ideal world.
Oh, interesting.
What do you think it would look like?
Well, based on what we've seen so far, I imagine it's a world where authenticity is valued above all else,
Mm-hmm.
where vulnerability and darkness aren't things to be hidden or ashamed of.
Right.
Maybe even a world where connection is found in that shared darkness,
Yeah.
rather than trying to pretend everything's perfect.
That's a really interesting observation. Yeah, it challenges that traditional idea that happiness and light are the ultimate goals.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, Totem Spectre seems to be suggesting that there's beauty and meaning to be found in those like darker,
Yeah.
less explored corners of the human experience.
It's definitely making me think about how we often try to suppress or deny those aspects of ourselves
Yeah.
and what might happen if we embrace them instead.
And that's where the power of art lies, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can force us to confront uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
question our assumptions, and explore perspectives that we might otherwise avoid.
So in a way, Totem Spectre's lyrics,
Yeah.
while often dark and unsettling, could actually be like a catalyst for personal growth and self-discovery.
Exactly. They offer a unique lens
Yeah.
through which to examine our own relationship with fear, darkness, and that desire for connection.
It's really interesting to think about.
We're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
There's so many more layers to unpack in these lyrics.
Oh, yeah, we haven't even touched on the recurring imagery of blood water and fire,
Right.
or delves into the psychological implications of specific songs, like Drowning Man and I've Got a Gun.
Exactly. So much more to explore.
This already getting so fascinating.
Yeah.
We've got a lot more to cover, so stay tuned as we continue this deep dive into the mind of Totem Spectre. So we left off talking about Totem Spectre's ideal world. And I'm curious, do you think their lyrics offer any clues about how to achieve that kind of radical authenticity? Or is it more of a utopian vision?
I think it's more about the journey than the destination. You know, the lyrics don't offer like a step-by-step guide to achieving this ideal state,
Right.
but they encourage a process of self-exploration and questioning. Like take Dustbin, for example.
Okay.
It's not a literal call to throw things away, but more like a symbolic shedding of societal expectations
Right.
and embracing the parts of ourselves that we usually try to hide.
That reminds me of what you were saying earlier about like the cathartic potential of exploring darkness.
Yeah.
It's almost like Totem Spectre saying, look, we all have these dark, messy parts. Let's stop pretending they don't exist
Right.
and see what happens when we confront them.
Exactly. And that confrontation can be unsettling, even painful at times.
Yeah.
Drowning Man comes to mind.
Okay.
It's a powerful portrayal of despair and suicidal ideation.
Right.
But there's also this glimmer of hope in the final lines. Like this hint that even in the darkest moments, the possibility of reaching out, of finding connection still exists.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
These lyrics aren't like a glorification of suffering,
Right.
but rather an honest exploration of the human condition in all its complexity.
And that honesty can be incredibly impactful for listeners.
Yeah. How so?
Well, think about someone who is struggling with their own mental health.
Okay.
Hearing those raw emotions expressed in music can be incredibly validating, you know?
Yeah.
It can make them feel less alone, less like they're the only ones going through those dark experiences.
It's like a shared language of pain and resilience.
Yeah, exactly.
And even if the lyrics don't offer like explicit solutions,
Right.
that feeling of shared experience can be incredibly empowering.
It can also spark important conversations.
Oh, interesting.
Totem Spectre's work might encourage listeners to reach out for help.
Okay.
Or to simply start talking more openly about their own struggles.
Speaking of conversations,
Yeah.
I noticed a recurring theme of anger and rebellion, particularly in songs like I've Got a Gun and Love is Shit.
Right.
What do you make of that anger? Is it directed inwards, outwards? Maybe a bit of both.
It's multifaceted. There's definitely anger directed at societal structures, at the hypocrisy and shallowness that the artist seems to perceive.
Right.
But there's also an element of self-directed anger, perhaps frustration with personal limitations or past experiences.
Okay.
You know, the artists changed their name to Alice Deeper later in their career.
Right.
Maybe this anger is part of what they were trying to move beyond to dive deeper into.
That's a really insightful connection.
Yeah.
It suggests that this anger isn't necessarily destructive. It could be like a catalyst for change, for personal growth.
Precisely. And that's something to keep in mind when analyzing art that deals with these darker themes. It's not always about wallowing in negativity. It can be about processing pain, challenging the status quo, and ultimately finding a path to healing and transformation.
So even in like the most unsettling songs, there's a potential for positive impact.
Absolutely. Take I've Got a Gun, for example.
Yeah.
While it's a disturbing song on the surface, it could be interpreted as a metaphor for reclaiming power,
Okay.
for refusing to be a victim of circumstance.
That's a much more nuanced interpretation than simply seeing it as a violent anthem.
Exactly. Art is rarely black and white.
Right.
It's about exploring the gray areas, the complexities of human experience, and that's where the real learning and growth can happen.
Okay, so we've talked about darkness,
Yeah.
escape, anger, and a longing for connection. But we haven't really touched on the recurring imagery in these lyrics.
Right.
There's a lot of fire, blood, and water.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think those images are just aesthetic choices,
Mm.
or do they carry a deeper psychological significance?
I definitely think there's more to it than just aesthetics.
Okay.
These images tap into primal universal experiences.
Mm.
Fire can represent destruction, but also purification, transformation.
Yeah.
Blood can symbolize pain and sacrifice, but also life force and vitality.
Right.
Water can be both life-giving and destructive, representing cleansing and drowning.
So how do those images connect to the larger themes we've been discussing?
Well, think about the artist's desire for escape.
Okay.
The imagery of trains and highways suggests a linear escape,
Uh-huh.
a forward motion.
Okay.
But the imagery of water, particularly drowning, suggests a different kind of escape, a submersion, a letting go.
That's a fascinating contrast.
Yeah.
It's like there's this tension between wanting to run away
Uh-huh.
and wanting to surrender, to be consumed by something larger than oneself.
And that tension is reflected in the music itself. You know, the industrial sound, the heavy rhythms,
Right.
they create this feeling of claustrophobia, of being trapped.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have these moments of ethereal beauty,
Mm-hmm.
almost like glimpses of transcendence.
It's like the music is mirroring the internal struggle that the lyrics are expressing.
Exactly, and that's what makes Totem Spectre's work so compelling.
Yeah.
It's not just about the words or the music, but the way they work together to create a visceral emotional experience for the listener.
It's like a whole body immersion into the artist's psyche.
And that immersion can be challenging, unsettling,
Mm-hmm.
but also incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
It can force us to confront our own darkness, to question our assumptions, and to ultimately emerge with a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
Wow. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of these lyrics.
I know, right?
Even after spending all this time unpacking them.
Yeah.
There's so much depth and complexity to Totem Spectre's work.
It's true, and that's a testament to the power of art, right?
Yeah.
A single song can contain multitudes,
Mm-hmm.
offering different meanings and interpretations depending on who's listening
Right.
and where they are in their own journey.
Thinking back on everything we've discussed,
Yeah.
what stands out to you as like the most significant takeaway from Totem Spectre's lyrics?
For me, it's the reminder that darkness isn't inherently bad or something to be feared. It's a part of the human experience just as essential as light. You know?
Yeah.
Totem Spectre's willingness to delve into those darker corners,
Right.
to confront uncomfortable truths,
Yeah.
ultimately leads to a more nuanced and authentic understanding of the self.
That resonates with me too.
Yeah,
It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of happiness and positivity,
right.
but sometimes those darker emotions hold the key to deeper self-awareness
Yeah.
and even personal growth.
Think about those recurring images of fire and water.
Okay.
They represent destruction, yes,
Uh-huh.
but also cleansing and transformation.
Right.
Maybe embracing those darker parts of ourselves, those experiences that burn and drown us,
Yeah.
is actually the path to becoming more whole, more authentic.
So instead of running from the darkness,
Uh-huh.
Totem Spectre's lyrics encourage us to confront it,
Yep.
to explore it,
Mhm.
and maybe even find some beauty in the process.
Precisely. It's like Nietzsche's idea of staring into the abyss. It can be terrifying,
Yeah.
but it can also be a source of profound insight and strength.
It makes me think about the impact of these lyrics on listeners.
Yeah.
We talked about how they can be validating for those who relate to those feelings of darkness and isolation,
Mm-hmm.
but could they also be a catalyst for change?
Absolutely. Art has the power to challenge our perspectives and inspire us to action. Someone who resonates with Totem Spectre's lyrics might be inspired to seek therapy,
Go ahead.
to connect with others who understand their struggles, or to simply start being more honest with themselves and those around them.
It's like a permission slip to embrace those less desirable parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Those emotions that society often tells us to suppress.
And that act of embracing rather than rejecting can be incredibly liberating.
Mm-hmm.
It can allow us to step into our true selves,
Yeah.
even if those selves are messy, flawed, and a little bit dark.
I'm also struck by how these lyrics, despite their darkness, ultimately point towards a yearning for connection. Even in the most isolated and despairing moments, there's a glimmer of hope,
Uh-huh.
a desire to find meaning and belonging.
It speaks to a universal human need.
Right.
We are social creatures wired for connection.
Mm-hmm.
And even when we feel most alone, that yearning for connection never fully disappears.
So Totem Spectre's work, while often challenging and unsettling, ultimately reminds us that we're not alone in our struggles.
Exactly.
That even in the darkest corners of the human experience, there's a possibility for finding meaning, connection, and even beauty.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us,
Yeah.
especially in a world that often feels increasingly fragmented and isolating.
So for listeners who are intrigued by what we've discussed today,
Yeah.
what would you recommend as a starting point for exploring Totem Spectre's music?
Well, I think it depends on what resonates with you.
Okay.
If you're drawn to the more existential themes, I'd recommend starting with Driven by Force and Visions of Fear.
Okay.
If you're interested in the exploration of love and disillusionment, Love is Shit and Thrown Away My Face are good entry points.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're ready to dive into the depths of despair and resilience, Drowning Man is a powerful and moving piece.
That's great advice, and I would add that it's important to approach these lyrics with an open mind and heart,
Yeah.
to allow yourself to feel the full spectrum of emotions they evoke.
Remember, art is meant to be experienced, not just analyzed.
Mm-hmm.
Let Totem Spectre's words wash over you, challenge you, comfort you, and ultimately lead you to a deeper understanding of yourself and the human experience.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex and fascinating world of Totem Spectre's lyrics.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We hope it sparked some insightful reflections for you.